Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, again, if you think about it, in 2019, the Socialism Conference's motto or slogan or whatever was "No borders, no bosses, no binaries," and that could quite literally be the motto of Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
Everyone is a self-employed digital nomad, so you've got no bosses. Yeah. No borders, so in future our elites don't have to go through the humiliation of being tried for human trafficking. They can just do it freely, and then the no binaries part. I mean, the thing is, the reason that the socialist left was more crazy in its application of kind of liberal identity politics is because their class position within the elite was more precarious, and therefore they had to leverage these extra bits of social capital that they had, their high education levels and so on. They had to leverage this social capital to make up for the fact that, so for example, if you're already a professor, you don't need to do that. But if you're an adjunct, you do.
Yeah. If you look at the system of imperial examinations in China that has was in effect for thousands of years. The main component was actually writing poems on Confucian, a certain sort of genre of Confucian poems. And you weren't supposed to be able to perform trigonometry or whatever. It was all about, had you assimilated the values, norms, and symbolism of the ruling class. And they had more or less SAT prep schools and so on in 1000 AD. And people just studied for years and years and years. So ultimately, to get ahead in that sort of system, you have to be the best motherfucker when it comes to writing some poem about Confucian hydrology or whatever, or Confucian applications of, advanced irrigation. And basically, we're seeing the same thing here today, these sort of imperial exams where there was an article in Quillette, actually, that was pretty good because you sort of hear the Marxist truth from Fools and Children today, that it was a musician in Canada, I think. And he more or less said that because of structural changes in the music industry, it was much harder for small artists to get ahead. So basically you had a few mega hits and then everyone else was living hand to mouth. And so the system for supporting artists that were struggling and that couldn't really perform at medium or small venues anymore because those didn't exist. Basically, there was a sort of dole from the government where, okay, you're an artist, you can get this sort of social security for artists or whatever. And he more or less said that, as a white middle-aged male, I can't really fill in these forms because nobody is really interested in the music. I just have to write this long essay about how this music impacts marginalized communities and this and that, and how it's relevant to the multiplicity of identities that intersect today. And if you don't master the language, you're not going to get any money. That's the brass tacks here. If you can't fill out these imperial examination forms, you're shit out of luck. Mm. So it's not just a system of, oh man, these socialists, these wacky DSA types, they're so stupid with their clapping. All of this is in order to build social and political power because there's a very harsh selection mechanism here. Mm. And there's only so many.
Angela,
Go ahead.
Yeah, Angela's point about this being the value of these being the values of Silicon Valley is right on the money. I mean, in your part about this being, a selection methodology, these two things just merge directly into just purely into just the functioning of capitalist businesses as such. more rules means, and Amy knows that I know the world of human resources very well. More rules means more ways to fire those people who aren't contract laborers. More rules means more workplace discipline, and in a good way, a soft way, a corporate social responsibility sort of way. If you adopt all of those rules, like minimize clapping, loud sounds, anything that can trigger someone, everything that you see doing there, it won't cost you any money, and it might save you money down the road.
Yeah.
It takes nothing. You can remove all these recalcitrant people who can't follow the rules and be soft and kind and easily managed.
Yeah, and all of these rules can be applied arbitrarily. So some people can clap. Some people can clap, and it's just like, whatever, why are you bothering about this? And someone else claps for the first time, and he's a fascist, and he has to get fired. So, like, you don't really have to follow these rules if you don't want to, but they're only useful one way.
Have you guys read any of Peter Turchin's work?
Unfortunately, no.
I have not.
Okay.
I have not.
Peter Turchin is a Russian academic who's kind of like the leading figure in a whole school of thought, which is really about, it's essentially about measuring, or it's about cycles of history, and it develops predictive models. And now because it's cycles, he obviously is not well liked among progressives, because by definition it's not a progressive view of history. But he's very interesting, and he is, like, I think, a more interesting materialist than most people on the left. And one of the things he really focuses on that has had a huge impact on the way I think about it all the time, is that he says that one of the predictors of revolutions, civil wars, social breakdowns, state breakdowns, periods of massive state conflict comes when you have a period of an overexpansion of the elite, and then essentially too many elites and too few elite positions.
Yeah.
Because even though the working class is much larger in size, if they don't have an organizing mechanism to exert their power and size, the people who are within the elite have much greater opportunities to do that. And so he predicted like a long time ago that this decade in America would be a decade of massive political turmoil and violence and potential social breakdown, because the period of, say, like the kind of Blair Clinton years, where you had this massive expansion of higher education, led to this position we're in now, where there's this swollen class of people who are elite aspirants, and the number of positions that they could possibly take up are much smaller. Yeah. And so the class of people who make up the so-called millennial socialist movement are really that gap between the elite, the part of the elite aspirant category that is not going to be able to make it into the real elite. So as I said, like, the adjunct has to humiliate themselves more than the professor because they are elite aspirants. And so that's really where a lot of this conflict comes from. So in some ways, like, when people talk about, like, the fact that the socialist movements are full of middle class, highly educated people, sometimes it gets bogged down in this thing of, like, oh, they have lots of money and therefore why are they socialists and so on. But I think the real way of understanding it is that is their class position. Yeah. They're highly educated. They thought they were going to make it into the elite. They're hanging on by a thread, and they have to fight like hell to get up that one step of the ladder. And really, I really think, I mean, to be kind of like, I almost feel horrible saying this because it's so bleak, but I kind of feel like it's fair enough to say that the whole millennial socialist phenomenon was basically the lower tier of elite aspirants in a last-ditch effort to wage a class war against the people who are slightly above them within the elite.
Yeah.
Yes. For example...
Yeah, that's it.
So for example...
Yeah, that's how I've seen it. Absolutely.
Yeah, so even if you look at a phenomenon like Me Too,
Yes.
Okay, so think about this, right? Are we really to believe that male novelists and kind of journalists with official contract positions in publications are like uniquely sexually predatory? Or is it that the people who are slightly below them on the class scale, who are, as I say, dangling by a thread, they're having an intra-elite conflict, and they're trying to weed out, they're trying to thin out the numbers of those who have made it one step above them in the hopes that they can replace them. So really, the millennial socialist movement was an intra-elite conflict. And I also suggest people read a really great, I haven't really seen it shared very much. I thought it was absolutely brilliant. The editor of American Affairs, Julius Krein, who's a conservative, wrote a piece about class in the edition before last. And he talks about how, the working class in the West obviously have, all kinds of grievances and problems. But the particular class group that have fallen most radically far from those immediately above them are precisely that class that I'm talking about.
Yes.
The article is called "The Real Class War," by the way.
That's right. Yeah. It's really good, and it actually goes and it does. There's good research in it about demonstrating this point. That, while working class wages have been stagnating for decades, they haven't absolutely fallen through the floor very suddenly and radically, whereas that class of people who are at the bottom end of the elite actually have, comparative to those other factions of the elite. So that is really, that intra-elite conflict is what has driven this whole thing.
I want to cut in here because there's actually another article on American Affairs called "The Cost of Thriving" that sort of adds another puzzle piece to that, which is not just that wages have been going down, but that the cost of thriving or living a middle class life have been going up. So in terms of college and stuff like that, the costs are just through the roof. That sort of ties into what we were talking about earlier, in that the competition here for access to the elite, because it's social power that you then transform into political and economical gains. You have to go to these really ridiculous preschools with this new pedagogy or whatever, because if you